Muid Comoran na Hachtrí Starula, a Harla an Sub, ag Sulcode Viog I Gunde Hibradoran Cade Blian O Hin, de Lewin Shahuin. Cuivnimid Arhu Shooth, Ila a Has an Fod Sun na Sirsha, Satresha Shin. Tomage Brodul Astu Fear, Agus Mana, a Visa Varna Voil, Agus an Tirsa, a Unsi a Grialtas na Bratina. Son Publicta, Dain Vahok, a Vishid ag Tridge, Agus is Cui an Rud Gwil Quivna Fos Arhu. I stand here, a proud Irish Republican with proud Tipperary roots, as President of Sinn Féin, to remember the historic event that took place here in Soloheadbeg 100 years ago. The action here is regarded as the first significant attack by the Irish Republican Army on British Crown forces in that period. The 9 volunteers involved had laid in wait for 5 days, expecting an RIC detachment to arrive with a consignment of explosives. They waited and waited in the cold and wet for the time to act. And each evening they returned home to the home of Dan Breen. At huge risk, Dan Breen's mother, Honora, a widowed mother, opened up her home to her rebel son and his comrades. At 4 each morning they set out to take up their positions. And each day before they left, Honora Breen got up and made them breakfast. And I love the way Dan Breen tells it in his book, My Fight for Irish Freedom. He tells, on the 5th morning, Dan's mother said, if ye don't do something today, ye can get your own breakfast in the morning. Soloheadbeg occurred on the very day that the first Dáil Éireann met in inaugural formation in Dublin's Mansion House. The majority of the people of this island had spoken at the ballot box. They voted for Sinn Féin. They voted for equality, for liberty, to break the link with Britain. It was no surprise that there were young men and women too, prepared to make that democratic vote effective by armed force if necessary. And the events of that time cannot be properly understood outside the context of that time and their background. You see, armed actions had begun before Soloheadbeg and indeed before the 1916 Rising. It was not Irish Republicans who brought the gun into Irish politics in that period. Our country had been garrisoned for centuries by British Crown forces. The British Conservative and Unionist Party had helped to fund, train, to lead and to arm the Ulster Volunteer Force. And they were duly deployed with the cooperation of senior British Army to threaten war if Home Rule was implemented. The message was clear in 1914 when the UVF landed thousands of arms at Larne, which was facilitated by Crown forces, while the Irish Volunteers, landing a tiny fraction of that number of arms at Howth, led to the killing of 3 Dublin civilians by the British Army. So make no mistake, Republicans were not the advocates of blood sacrifice. That fell to John Redmond when he induced tens of thousands of Irishmen to their death in the trenches of an imperialist war. With war came the repressive defence of the Realm Act, rendering peaceful political opposition to British rule and to the British Army recruiting as seditious, and empowering the British authorities to suppress and censor at will. This was the background to the 1916 Rising, and of course, In its aftermath, repression greatly increased, with the executions, the mass imprisonment and deportation. 1917 and 1918 saw military rule throughout Ireland. People were jailed for speaking out, for flying the tricolour, for singing nationalist songs. Meetings, dances, GAA games were suppressed. People were attacked with bayonets and bullets. And the British government greatly escalated the situation as it prepared to enforce conscription in April 1918. And this was despite, or perhaps in response to, the fact that the people in by-elections elected Republican MPs. The British government refused to listen to the democratic will of the Irish people. The leaders of Sinn Féin, including many newly elected MPs, remained in prison. So, my friends, the people had entered a new era politically, but the old British military regime remained the same. Little wonder, then, that those like Dan Breen and Sean Tracy concluded in Breen's words that they had enough of being pushed around and getting our men imprisoned while we remained inactive. So they determined to seize arms from the RIC. The actions at Soloheadbeg didn't start a war with the British, and armed action still remained relatively isolated. Republicans then prioritised a peaceful path. The Dáil had met. It had sent its delegates to the peace conference at Paris. It had appealed to public opinion in Britain, in the United States of America and beyond. But door after door was slammed shut to Ireland by the British government, including at the peace conference. And this culminated in the outright banning of Dáil Éireann in late 1919. And it was after all of those peaceful routes were closed that the conflict really intensified. So contrary to the narrative of the so-called revisionists, it was the actions of the British government which made armed conflict inevitable. Martin McGuinness once said that he didn't go to war, that the war came to him. Well, the people here of County Tipperary and the people of Ireland didn't go to war. The British government brought war to us. And war isn't something to be glorified. It's not the first, the second, or the third option for anyone. It is the option of last resort. But it is also a legitimate option of last resort. And when it happens, there will always be those willing to step into the Bharn of Whale, to act selflessly, to risk life and liberty. And today we remember with great pride those who would not lie down, those who were ready to resist, and those who stood up to the British Empire. So it's right and fitting that we're here. We remember Sean Tracy, Dan Breen, Seamus Robinson, Sean Hogan, Tim Crowe, Patrick O'Dwyer, Michael Ryan, Patrick McCormack and Jack O'Mara. And remember also that across Ireland, men and women such as these stood fast for freedom. And they had the support of the people, without whom they simply could not have operated. You see, it was the people's struggle for freedom. As Republicans, we know the cost of conflict. And that's why now, in our generation, we so greatly value the peaceful and democratic pathway to Irish unity that we now enjoy. Because no other generation should face the choices that Sean Tracy and Dan Breen faced. There are some in powerful positions who would like to forget today's events, the events of today a century ago. In fact, we watch now as they contort themselves to remove the name of Sinn Féin and the IRA from history. They want us to forget that the degree of independence won for the 26 counties was only won because the British government was forced to a negotiation table in 1921. For the most part, the last 100 years has seen the political establishment engage in misrule. The bravery of the volunteers at Solohead is in stark contrast to the actions of these quislings. A century on, and the political establishment has failed to deliver the Republic. Indeed, they have thwarted the advancement of the Republic. And they want people to believe now that their way is the only way. They fear that people might look back and remember above all that all things are possible. They fear a risen people. They fear a woken generation who see through their revisionism, their hypocrisy, and their denial of rights. Who look on in disbelief at an establishment who believes that homelessness is acceptable, that poverty is inevitable, and that partition is permanent. They tell us, 100 years after Soloheadbeg, that now is not the time to talk about Irish unity. Well, let me say this loud and clear. Now is the time, and here is the place. Seo an tam anish agus é seo an oich. Beg ein tucht aging agus beg co-onas aging. This is the time. This is the place. We will have unity. We will have equality. We will have our sovereignty. I dare anyone to try and stop us. We will have a republic to honour all of our patriots. And that will be a republic of equal citizens and a home for all. A republic that's not sullied by homelessness, by selfishness, by fat cat ideology. A republic where workers are respected and rewarded for a fair day's work. And all of this is going to call on all of us. It'll take patience. It'll take generosity. It'll take courage and determination. And it'll take all of us working together for the common good. But we will prevail because we must prevail. A century on, and here we stand, unbroken, unbowed, unrepentant Fenians. And we honour the memory of our Fenian dead. And we say we will finish the journey where Tipperary leads, Ireland follows.